Across 17 different star systems, the Zetharian Scientific Consortium had built its reputation on one simple principle: know your enemies before they know themselves. Their xenobiology department operated with the kind of methodical precision that had kept the consortium's 12 species alive and thriving for the past 3 millennia. So when long-range sensors detected a particular blue-green marble orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, the department heads did what they always did. They studied it. What they found should have sent them running in the opposite direction at maximum warp. The third planet from that unremarkable sun was absolutely crawling with apex predators. Not just any apex predators, mind you, but the kind that made Zetharian military strategists wake up in cold sweats. These creatures, humans, their databases eventually classified them, possessed every terrifying trait the consortium had learned to fear in their enemies over the centuries. Dr. Vexatul, the department's leading xenobiologist, had spent the better part of 2 standard years compiling what could only be described as a horror anthology disguised as a research file. Humans, it seemed, were living violations of several natural laws the consortium had previously considered inviolable. Take their pain tolerance, for instance. Standard consortium doctrine suggested that any species experiencing more than 4.2 units of neural distress would immediately cease combat effectiveness. Humans regularly fought through injuries that should have rendered them catatonic, often while making what their species called jokes about their condition. Vexatul had documented 17 separate incidents where humans had continued fighting after losing what other species would consider vital body parts. Then there was their endurance. Most intelligent species in the galaxy had evolved past the need for persistence hunting, having discovered more civilized methods of acquiring sustenance, like agricultural development or energy synthesis. Humans, apparently, had missed that particular evolutionary memo. They could run down prey across vast distances, their peculiar bipedal locomotion allowing them to maintain pursuit for hours. Some specimens had been observed running recreational distances that would hospitalize a Zetharian athlete, but perhaps most disturbing was their pack behavior. Unlike other predator species that relied on simple hierarchy or instinctual cooperation, humans demonstrated something the research team had taken to calling tactical empathy. They could predict, manipulate, and coordinate with their pack members in ways that suggested a hive-mind intelligence, yet retained individual creativity and initiative. It was like dealing with a species that had somehow weaponized friendship. The military applications were nightmare fuel. Human history was basically a comprehensive manual on creative violence, spanning everything from individual combat techniques to planetary-scale warfare. They had developed weapons that could eliminate cities, then had the psychological wherewithal to actually use them, twice, on themselves, and then they had developed better weapons. "Sir," Vexatul's research assistant, a nervous Kepler class named Ziektol, had said during one particularly disturbing briefing, "Perhaps we should recommend that the consortium avoid this system entirely. These humans appear to be naturally occurring weapons of mass destruction." Vexatul had considered this recommendation for approximately 3.7 seconds before dismissing it entirely. The Zetharian Scientific Consortium hadn't become the galaxy's premier research institution by running away from interesting specimens. Besides, knowing their luck, humans would probably develop faster-than-light travel within the next few centuries, and come looking for them anyway. Better to understand the threat now, while they still had the advantage. "Nonsense," Vexatul had replied, adjusting his primary optical sensors with the confidence of someone who had obviously never met a human. "We are scientists, Ziektol. We study dangerous phenomena safely, from a distance, with proper protocols. What could possibly go wrong?" Those words would later be carved into Vexatul's memorial plaque, right beneath famous last words of scientific overconfidence. The research team spent months developing what they considered foolproof containment procedures. Force fields rated for Class X energy discharges, atmospheric controls capable of inducing immediate unconsciousness, neural suppressors designed to prevent the formation of escape plans, automated defense systems that could react faster than human reflexes. They had contingencies for every documented human capability. Enhanced strength, compensated for. Superior endurance, negated by controlled environment. Pack coordination, irrelevant with a single specimen. Tactical intelligence, countered by limiting information access. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Acquire one human specimen, conduct comprehensive behavioral and physiological analysis, develop appropriate countermeasures for future contact scenarios, then return the subject with selective memory modification. Clean, scientific, and ethically defensible under consortium research protocols. Vexthul personally oversaw the selection process. They needed a representative sample, not too young to be considered developed, not too old to be physically declining, with sufficient life experience to demonstrate typical human behavioral patterns. The computers eventually identified several thousand suitable candidates from their orbital surveillance data. The final selection came down to practical considerations. The chosen specimen lived alone, maintained minimal social connections that would notice a temporary absence, and followed predictable daily routines that would facilitate clean extraction, perfect for their purposes. The extraction itself went flawlessly. Advanced stasis technology, molecular transportation, sterile laboratory environment, everything proceeded exactly according to protocol. The human was secured in their specially designed containment facility within 2.3 standard hours of initial acquisition. Vexthul stood before the observation portal, watching their prize specimen sleep peacefully in the stasis field, completely unaware of the scientific breakthrough they represented, the galaxy's most dangerous apex predator, captured and contained by superior Zetharian technology and planning. Begin preliminary scans, Vexthul ordered, practically vibrating with scientific excitement. I want full biological workup, psychological profile baseline, and comprehensive threat assessment within 6 standard hours. The research team moved with practiced efficiency, their instruments humming as they began cataloging every aspect of their human subject. Outside the laboratory, the research station's automated systems continued their perpetual vigilance, sensors sweeping space for any signs of pursuit or complications. None of them noticed the small life-form signature that had somehow attached itself to their vessel during the extraction process. It barely registered on their sensors. Too small to be a threat, too insignificant to warrant investigation. That oversight would prove to be their first mistake. Their second mistake was assuming they understood what they were dealing with. The human specimen was, in Vexthul's professional opinion, magnificently unremarkable. Average height by human standards, average build, average coloring. Exactly the kind of bland exterior that made apex predators so effective, like a perfectly camouflaged hunter designed to blend into any environment until the moment of strike. Fascinating, Vexthul murmured, reviewing the preliminary scans on his datapad. Observe the deceptive nature of human physiology. This specimen appears completely non-threatening to casual observation, yet our readings confirm bone density 23% above galactic standard, muscle fiber composition optimized for both endurance and explosive power, and neural architecture suggesting processing speeds that approach military-grade AI. The human was currently unconscious, suspended in the gentle blue glow of the stasis field, looking for all the world like any other bipedal species enjoying a pleasant nap. But Vexthul knew better. Those closed eyes would open with predatory intelligence. Those relaxed hands could snap Zetharian necks with casual efficiency. That peaceful expression masked a mind capable of tactical thinking that had conquered an entire planet. Jiktal checked his instruments nervously. Sir, should we maintain full stasis during the initial observation period? The subject's biometrics suggest consciousness could return at any moment. Absolutely not, Vexthul replied, his enthusiasm for proper scientific methodology overriding basic survival instinct. We need to observe natural behavioral patterns. Stasis-induced docility would contaminate our data. Begin consciousness restoration procedures immediately. The transition from artificial sleep to natural wakefulness took approximately 17 minutes. During that time, Vexthul's team positioned their recording equipment, double-checked containment integrity, and made final preparations for their first direct observation of an active human specimen. When those human eyes finally opened, the change in laboratory atmosphere was immediate and profound. The subject didn't jolt awake or display panic responses like most species would upon finding themselves in alien captivity. Instead, consciousness returned with the smooth, controlled awareness of a predator assessing a new environment. The eyes, an unremarkable brown color that somehow managed to be deeply unsettling, moved systematically across the containment chamber, cataloguing every detail with mechanical precision. "Note the initial response pattern," Vexthul whispered into his recording device. "No emotional distress indicators, no disorientation despite obvious environmental displacement. The subject is immediately beginning tactical assessment of the situation." The human sat up slowly, movements economical and purposeful. Those supposedly average hands tested the air, checking for atmospheric composition through unconscious sensory evaluation. The head tilted slightly, listening to ambient sounds and calculating acoustic properties of the chamber. The eyes returned to the observation portal, and for one deeply uncomfortable moment, Vexthul felt certain the human was looking directly at him through what should have been one-way transparent aluminium. "Can it see us?" Zikal asked, his voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "Impossible. The portal is completely opaque from the interior side. The subject is simply investigating potential exit routes." Vexthul's confidence sounded slightly forced, even to his own auditory receptors. As if responding to their conversation, the human stood and began a methodical examination of the containment chamber. But this wasn't random exploration, it was systematic reconnaissance. The subject tested wall materials with gentle pressure, examined the atmospheric recycling vents, and traced the pattern of the force field generators with what appeared to be intuitive understanding of the technology involved. "Remarkable," Vexthul breathed. "Observe how it instinctively identifies structural weak points without any prior exposure to our technology. This confirms theoretical models about human pattern recognition and adaptive intelligence." The human completed its environmental assessment and took a position in the center of the chamber, equidistant from all walls, with clear sight lines to every potential entry point. Then it simply stood there, waiting, with the infinite patience of a hunter. Hours passed. The human didn't pace, didn't test the barriers again, didn't show any signs of stress or agitation. It just waited, motionless as a statue, ready to react instantly to any change in circumstance. The research team took turns monitoring, but found the vigilant stillness more unnerving than aggressive behavior would have been. "Sir," Jiktal reported during the third hour of observation, "subject's biometrics remain completely steady. Heart rate, respiration, neural activity, all within normal parameters for relaxed alertness. How is this possible under these circumstances?" Vexthul consulted his research files, cross-referencing human psychological profiles, stress adaptation mechanisms. Humans evolved in environments with constant existential threats. Their nervous systems are designed to maintain operational efficiency under extreme pressure indefinitely. This specimen is probably more comfortable in captivity than most species would be in their own homes. By the 6th hour, even Vexthul was beginning to feel the psychological pressure of that unwavering vigilance. The human hadn't moved from its position, hadn't shown any signs of fatigue or boredom, and maintained that ready stillness that suggested coiled violence, waiting for the proper moment to strike. "Perhaps we should introduce some stimulus," Jektal suggested. "Test responses to environmental changes, communication attempts, food offerings." "Excellent thinking. Begin with basic sustenance presentation. We need to observe feeding behaviors and dietary adaptations." The automated feeding system delivered a selection of standard nutritional supplements through the chamber's service port, a variety of protein sources, carbohydrates, and essential minerals that should meet basic biological requirements for any oxygen-breathing species. The human examined the offerings with the same systematic approach it had applied to everything else, but Vexthul detected something different in its manner. The movements were slightly more fluid, the examination less clinical. After several minutes of consideration, the subject selected items with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than mere survival necessity. "Fascinating. Note the selection pattern. The subject shows clear preferences, suggesting developed cultural tastes rather than purely instinctual feeding behavior. This indicates sophisticated social conditioning that persists even under stress." As the human ate, Vexthul observed what he initially categorized as unusual oral behaviors. The subject appeared to be making soft vocalizations, not communication attempts directed at the observers, but quiet sounds that seemed almost conversational in nature. "Is it talking to itself?" Jiktal asked. "Possibly. Some apex predators engage in self-reinforcement behaviors during stress periods." Continue monitoring, but something about those soft sounds nagged at Vextool's scientific sensibilities. They didn't match the vocal patterns in their human behavioral database. The intonation was different, higher pitched, more melodic, almost affectionate in quality. It would be several more hours before they realized the human wasn't talking to itself at all. The first sign that their carefully controlled experiment was about to become considerably less controlled came at 3:47 hours ship time, when the automated security system registered what it classified as a minor biological anomaly in Laboratory Section C. Vextool was reviewing overnight behavioral data when Zictal burst into his office with the kind of barely controlled panic that usually preceded career-ending disasters. "Sir, we have a problem, a significant problem, multiple significant problems actually, and they're all related to something that should have been impossible." Vextool set down his datapad with the careful precision of someone bracing for very bad news. "Define significant problem, Zictal. And please do so using specific scientific terminology rather than emotional outbursts. There was something else aboard the ship, sir. Something that came with the human specimen but didn't register on our extraction scanners. Something that's been loose in the research station for the past 14 hours. The blood in Vextool's circulatory system achieved what could only be described as Arctic temperatures. Loose biological contaminants were the kind of scenario that turned routine research missions into emergency evacuation situations. What kind of something? Parasite? Symbiont? Bacterial infection? That's where it gets complicated, sir. According to our sensors, it's a small quadrupedal mammal, approximately 4 kilograms, with no apparent weapons or defensive mechanisms. It shouldn't be capable of surviving in our atmospheric conditions, but it's been moving freely through the ship's ventilation system without any apparent distress. Vextool's secondary brain processed this information and immediately began calculating containment protocols, quarantine procedures, and emergency sterilization requirements. His primary brain, however, was stuck on a single, terrifying question. "Zictal, if this creature has been loose for 14 hours, where exactly is it now?" The answer to that question became apparent when they returned to the Human Observation Laboratory and discovered their apex predator specimen behaving in a manner that violated every single behavioral prediction in their research database. The human was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the containment chamber, making those same soft vocalizations they had observed during feeding periods, but now the context was clear, because curled in the human's lap was approximately 4 kilograms of fur, whiskers, and what appeared to be weaponized cuteness. "Is that," Vextool said slowly, "a small Earth predator?" The creature in question was black and white, with large eyes, pointed ears, and a long tail that moved in hypnotic patterns. It appeared to be producing a low-frequency vibration that their audio sensors were registering as some kind of communication or territorial marking behavior. But the truly disturbing part wasn't the mysterious appearance of an unauthorized life form. The truly disturbing part was watching the galaxy's most feared apex predator transform into something that challenged every assumption in their research files. The human's entire demeanor had changed. The predatory alertness was gone, replaced by something that could only be described as gentle attentiveness. Those dangerous hands that could snap necks were now moving with infinite delicacy, stroking the creature's fur with a tenderness that seemed completely incompatible with human psychology, as they understood it. And the vocalizations. Dear gods of scientific methodology, the vocalizations. "Who's such a pretty girl?" the human was saying in a voice pitched approximately 2 octaves higher than normal human speech patterns. "Yes, you are. You are such a pretty, pretty girl. Did you miss me? I missed you so much." Vextool's scientific worldview began experiencing what could only be described as a catastrophic structural failure. "Sir," Zictal whispered, "the apex predator appears to be diminished by the presence of this creature. Look at the posture changes, the vocal alterations, the complete abandonment of defensive positioning." It was true. Everything that had made their human specimen terrifying had simply evaporated. The tactical awareness, the controlled aggression, the predatory patience, all of it replaced by something that looked disturbingly like parental behavior, directed at what was obviously another species entirely. The small creature, their databases eventually identified it as Felis catus, a common Earth domesticate, seemed completely unbothered by its alien surroundings. It continued producing that rhythmic vibration while the human performed what appeared to be grooming behaviors, occasionally pausing to touch its nose to the human's face in what looked like some kind of species-crossing affection display. Run a complete biometric analysis on both subjects, Vextool ordered, his voice slightly hoarse. I need to understand what we're observing here. The results were even more disturbing than the behavior itself. The human's stress indicators had dropped to levels they hadn't seen since initial stasis. Heart rate, blood pressure, neural activity, everything suggested a state of profound contentment that stood in stark contrast to the vigilant alertness they had documented previously. Meanwhile, the small Earth creature showed no signs of distress whatsoever. It was comfortable, relaxed, and apparently treating their advanced research facility like personal territory. Sir, Zigtal said, reviewing the overnight surveillance data, I've traced the creature's path through the ship. It appears to have entered through the extraction bay during specimen acquisition, then spent several hours exploring the entire research station before locating the human's containment chamber. How did it bypass our security systems? That's the interesting part. It didn't bypass them, it just didn't trigger them. Our sensors are calibrated for threats above a certain mass and aggression threshold. This creature barely registers as a life form, much less a potential danger. Vextool watched the human lift the small creature until they were face to face, continuing that bizarre vocal behavior. I think I love you more than tuna, the human was saying. Yes, I do, more than tuna and chin scratches combined. Zigtal, Vextool said slowly, I believe we may have made a fundamental error in our assessment of human psychology. Sir, we've been studying them as apex predators, individual hunters operating according to aggressive survival imperatives. But what if that's only one dimension of their behavioral spectrum? The implications were staggering. If humans were capable of this kind of cross-species bonding, this level of protective care for creatures that provided no obvious survival advantage, then their entire threat assessment model was incomplete. The human had noticed their observation activity and looked directly at the portal, not with the calculating assessment they had shown before, but with something that looked remarkably like concern. Hey, the human said, speaking directly to them for the first time, she needs specific nutrition and environmental conditions. If you're going to keep us here, I need to make sure she's properly cared for. The tone was completely reasonable, almost conversational, but underneath the polite words was something that made Vextool's survival instincts activate with unprecedented intensity. The apex predator hadn't been diminished by the presence of the small creature. It had found something worth protecting. What followed could only be described as the most comprehensive reassessment of xenobiological assumptions in consortium history, conducted under circumstances that would have been comedic if they weren't so utterly terrifying. Vextool found himself in the unprecedented position of negotiating research protocols with his own test subject, who had somehow managed to reverse the entire power dynamic by the simple expedient of caring about something other than its own survival. The ambient temperature needs to be raised by 3 degrees, the human explained patiently, cradling the small Earth creature with the same protective care they had observed in human parents defending offspring. And she'll need access to a sand-based substrate for natural elimination behaviors. Also, do you have anything that approximates meat-based nutrition? The synthetic proteins you've been providing won't meet her dietary requirements. Zigtal looked at his supervisor with barely controlled hysteria. Sir, the apex predator is giving us care instructions for what appears to be its pet. I noticed that, Zigtal. The question is whether we comply or risk discovering what happens when a protective human parent perceives threats to its young. They complied. Over the following days, Vextool's research team found themselves in the surreal position of redesigning their entire containment facility around the comfort requirements of a 4-kilogram Earth domesticate. Climate controls were adjusted, specialized nutrition was synthesized, recreational equipment was fabricated based on human specifications for something called cat enrichment. The transformation in human behavior was nothing short of revolutionary for their understanding of the species. The same individual who had demonstrated infinite patience for escape planning now displayed infinite patience for what could only be described as interspecies caregiving. The tactical intelligence that had made them so formidable was now directed toward ensuring optimal living conditions for a creature that served no apparent survival function. Observe the protective behavior patterns, Vextool noted in his research logs. The human subject has established a defensive perimeter around the smaller creature and maintains constant vigilance for potential threats to its well-being. However, this protection manifests as cooperation with captors rather than aggression, suggesting that human pack bonding extends beyond species boundaries and can be leveraged to ensure compliance. But the real revelation came when they attempted to separate the two subjects for individual study. The small creature, which had shown no distress at alien captivity, immediately began producing loud vocalizations when removed from human contact. The human's response was immediate and, from a research perspective, utterly fascinating. Every single apex predator characteristic they had documented returned instantly, but amplified beyond their previous measurements. The cooperative subject became a barely contained weapon focused entirely on reunification with its companion. Stress indicators spiked to levels that suggested the human was preparing for potentially lethal conflict. "Fascinating," Vexful murmured, watching their docile test subject transform back into something that made his survival instincts scream warnings. The protective imperative overrides self-preservation concerns entirely. The human is demonstrating willingness to engage in destructive behavior that would endanger its own survival, rather than allow perceived harm to the smaller creature. They returned to the Earth domesticate within minutes, and the human immediately reverted to cooperative behavior, but not before making several observations that suggested uncomfortably advanced understanding of their research station's structural vulnerabilities. "Your containment field generators are running approximately 15% above optimal efficiency," the human mentioned casually while resuming its protective position around the small creature. "Might want to check the power coupling on the secondary array before you get harmonic resonance in the field matrix." Zichtal ran immediate diagnostics and discovered that the human was absolutely correct. "Sir, how did it identify a technical problem that our own monitoring systems haven't detected yet?" "Pattern recognition and intuitive engineering assessment," Vextul replied, making notes about human observational capabilities that would require significant updates to their threat assessment protocols. "The subject has been unconsciously analyzing our technology since arrival and apparently understands our systems well enough to identify potential failure points." The implications were staggering. They weren't just dealing with apex predators, they were dealing with apex everything. Hunters, engineers, parents, strategists, diplomats. Humans seemed capable of adapting their intelligence to whatever role circumstances required. Over the following weeks, their research expanded into areas that had never appeared in the original project specifications. They documented human capacity for what could only be described as emotional engineering, the ability to form genuine psychological bonds with non-human species and modify behavior accordingly. They observed tactical empathy in action as the human correctly interpreted the needs and preferences of a creature with completely different sensory capabilities and communication methods. They witnessed resource allocation behaviors that prioritized another species' advantage over personal comfort. Perhaps most remarkably, they discovered that human parental behaviors weren't limited to biological offspring or even their own species. The small Earth creature had somehow activated protective responses that appeared to be hardwired into human psychology at a fundamental level. "Sir," Zichtal reported during one of their daily briefings, "I've been analyzing the interaction patterns between our subjects, and I believe we need to completely revise our understanding of human social dynamics." "In what way?" "They're not just pack hunters, sir. They're pack adopters. The human has essentially incorporated the Earth domesticate into its family unit despite the obvious biological impossibilities. This suggests that human social structures are infinitely more flexible and inclusive than we initially assessed." Vextul reviewed the behavioral data and felt a peculiar sensation that he eventually identified as scientific humility. "Zichtal, I believe we may have been studying the wrong species entirely. Look at the power dynamic. The human, apex predator, tactical genius, engineering intuitive, has structured its entire existence around the comfort and preferences of a creature that weighs 4 kilograms and has no apparent survival capabilities. Who exactly is the dominant species in this relationship?" As if summoned by their conversation, the small Earth creature chose that moment to produce a single vocalization from the containment chamber. The human immediately abandoned its current activity and moved to provide whatever service had been requested. The human is completely enslaved, Shiktal whispered in amazement. It's been domesticated by its own domesticate. The revelation that followed was perhaps the most profound discovery in consortium xenobiological history. Humans weren't just apex predators. They were apex servants, genetically programmed to serve the needs of small, cute creatures that had figured out how to exploit human parental responses for their own benefit. The Earth domesticate, this cat, represented perhaps the most successful parasitic relationship in known galactic biology. It provided minimal utility to its human host while receiving comprehensive care, protection, and resource allocation, and the human not only accepted this arrangement but appeared to derive genuine satisfaction from it. Sir, Zhuxao said, reviewing their final data compilation, what are the implications for future human contact scenarios? Vextal considered the question carefully. Humans were still apex predators, still tactically brilliant, still capable of creative violence on planetary scales, but they were also apparently vulnerable to small, cute creatures that knew how to manipulate their caregiving responses. I believe, he said slowly, that we may have discovered the galaxy's most effective diplomatic strategy for dealing with humans. Sir, and cats first. The research station returned both subjects to Earth 3 days later, along with a comprehensive report recommending immediate establishment of formal diplomatic relations with humanity, mediated naturally by their Earth domesticate intermediaries. Vexthal's final note in the research files captured what would become known as the Terran paradox. Most dangerous species in known galaxy is simultaneously most caring species in known galaxy. Recommend extreme caution when approaching, but bring appropriate small mammals for treaty negotiations. The consortium's first diplomatic mission to Earth succeeded beyond all expectations, primarily because their ambassador was a very confused but well-treated cat who had somehow learned to enjoy space travel. Humans, as it turned out, were perfectly reasonable to deal with, as long as you understood that any successful relationship with them would ultimately involve making yourself completely subservient to their various small furry overlords. The galaxy had found its apex predator and discovered it came pre-domesticated.